I'm Karen, a 25-year-old employee, and 6 months ago, my grandfather, who raised me, passed away. Today is the day when the lawyer will open my grandfather's will, prompting my visit to his house with my sister Susan. Susan, 4 years older than me, is my only family since our parents passed away in an accident 20 years ago. Raised by our grandparents, we faced the loss of our grandmother to illness a few years ago, and our grandfather's health had been declining ever since. Concerned for him, I chose to live in an apartment near his house, regularly checking on him. "You're a grown woman. It's unbecoming to keep coming back home," my grandfather would say cheerfully. But despite his words, I continued my visits. One day, arriving as usual, I discovered my grandfather in pain at the entrance. In a panic, I called an ambulance, but he passed away suddenly. "Hey, what are you daydreaming for? At least prepare some tea." My sister Susan's voice brought me back to reality. "Right, the lawyer will be here soon," I replied, heading to the kitchen. Glancing at Susan stretching out her legs on the mat and yawning, I could still smell her strong perfume from a distance. "She's the same as always," I murmured as I placed the kettle on the stove. My sister had always been self-centered, dyeing her hair in her teens and hanging out with delinquents. She demanded money without working, causing trouble that our grandparents had to apologize for, leaving me to deal with the fallout as the quiet one. Even as an adult with no stable job, she drifted around, working part-time. I knew she had been asking our grandfather for money in my absence, finding the situation troublesome. If it weren't for the inheritance, I thought, interrupted by Susan's formal greeting to the arriving lawyer. "Ah, you must be the lawyer. Thanks for coming today," she said in her high-pitched voice. Rushing to join them, I thanked the lawyer for his presence, recalling his kind eyes that mirrored my grandfather's. The lawyer's badge gleamed brightly on his chest as we began the process after offering incense in front of my grandfather's portrait. He took a sip of the tea, marking the beginning of a significant and uncertain chapter in our lives. I retrieved my grandfather's will, a document entrusted to him while he was still alive. Its contents revealed that my elder sister Susan was to inherit $20 million in cash, while I, the younger daughter, would inherit the house and the land it stood on. Upon hearing this, Susan burst into laughter, finding it amusing that she was to receive a substantial sum while I, the younger and supposedly plainer sister, would only inherit an old house. "It's just right for someone as plain as you," she remarked snidely. I retorted, pointing out that it wasn't just the house but also the land. She dismissed the value of the land in such a seemingly undesirable location, expressing a preference for cash. I couldn't deny feeling a bit shocked, acknowledging that perhaps my grandfather wanted me to protect his cherished house and land, where he spent his life with my grandmother. "Wow, a house and land. That's pretty awesome, isn't it, Brian?" my boyfriend exclaimed in surprise upon hearing my story. Shaking my head, I implied that it wasn't as great as it sounded, given that my sister inherited $20 million in cash. "More impressive, I'd say," I remarked, feeling a sense of emptiness as I verbalized it. Trying to be modest, I continued, even though I was trying to be modest. "Beautiful and having money, now she's the better," Brian remarked insensitively, earning a side glance from me. Realizing his mistake, he jokingly added, "Your comfort means more to me than money." Brian had been my boyfriend since I started working, and we met at a social event. Although he hadn't proposed yet, I had been considering marriage, and today was our first date in the wild. I ended up sharing details about my inheritance with Brian, thinking he might become my husband someday. Little did I know that I would come to regret this. A few days later, as I visited the family home I had inherited, I planned to clean and sort out my grandfather's belongings. The property was large, but the house was modest. Contemplating the idea of moving in and living here leisurely with a cat, I considered the absence of rent payments, despite potential maintenance costs for deterioration. I had been working hard and saving, so it shouldn't be a problem. Someday, maybe with Brian. Feeling embarrassed at the thought, I shook my head vigorously and rolled up my sleeves to begin cleaning. Just then, I received a call, and my sister's name appeared on my smartphone screen. "Sis, what's up?" "Hey, Karen, having fun all by yourself in that old house?" My sister slurred, clearly intoxicated. She always had a unique way of extending her words, but today it was particularly bad. "Since you're drinking, aren't you?" "It's still afternoon," I pointed out with a sigh, to which she exaggeratedly sighed back. "Oh, you're such a Miss Goody Two-Shoes." "I was thinking about moving here eventually." I answered my sister's question, hoping to end the conversation quickly. "Really? I'm enjoying a suite in a luxury hotel right now." My sister raised her voice, sounding somewhat exaggerated. "Guess who I'm with right now?" "I have no idea," I replied, finding the situation rather boring. "It's that kind of attitude that'll make Brian dislike you," my sister quipped. "What?" "I'm sorry, Karen." I was flabbergasted when Brian's voice suddenly took over the line. The sudden intervention of Brian threw me off balance, and dizzying question marks popped up in my head. I resented my imagination at this point. A disgusting scenario had been completed in my head. Surprised, "Huh?" My sister's mean-spirited voice chimed in. "Ever since you introduced him to me, I thought Brian was quite a catch." She went on to boast about how she had been attracted to Brian since I introduced him, how she knew where he worked because of me, and how she had approached him as soon as he left work. He came along readily when she asked, telling her that she was hundreds of times more attractive than me. I listened in stunned silence, unable to utter a word. "Karen, I'm really sorry." Brian's voice came again. "Tell me it's a mistake." I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. As a man, I had to take this opportunity. "I do feel bad about it, but come on, it's impossible to resist a beautiful woman who has $20 million, right?" The way he spoke, as if asking me to understand, drained my emotions away, and I felt a cold sensation, like my blood was being drained from me. "You know what? I don't need a man like you," I finally said, and I could hear my sister laughing uproariously in the background. The voice on the phone changed back to my sister. "Well, that's how it is. And from now on, let's not consider ourselves sisters, okay? I wouldn't want you turning to me just because you're broke," she added before abruptly ending the call. Overwhelmed by emotions that had lied behind, all I could do was cry. It had been 5 years since that fateful call as I sat with a cat in my lap, dozing off in front of my laptop. The cat also peacefully slept. It was my day off, but there was still some work left from where I brought home. "Oh no, this won't get the work done," I thought to myself, feeling guilty. But I had to gently move the cat off my lap. Just as I reached out to my laptop, my phone started to ring. An unfamiliar number was displayed on my smartphone. Thinking it could be work-related, I answered the call without any suspicion. "Hello, Karen. Long time no see." I instantly knew who it was and froze. The distinctive way of speaking was unmistakably my sister's. "It's you, Karen, isn't it? I can tell just from your initial hello. After all, I'm your big sister." 5 years had passed, which should make Susan 34 years old. A smirk formed at the corner of my mouth at her unchanging way of talking. "You're just the same. By the way, I came home, and there's a hotel standing. Did you sell a house?" "That's none of your business." "Oh, come on. It's quite a grand hotel, huh?" "You must have made a good chunk of change, huh?" Getting fed up, I was about to end the call when she started to chatter about her current situation. According to Susan, she had blown through the inheritance in about 2 years, and now she even had a considerable amount of debt. Even Brian, who she's still hanging around, seemed to be drowning in debt. I was speechless. Honestly, I couldn't care less. "So, lend me some money," Susan requested, yelling. But I answered calmly, "I've always wondered why Grandpa distributed his estate that way. But on the day you took Brian from me and cut ties, I understood." I started talking slowly, reminiscing about 5 years ago when Brian broke up with me, leaving me crushed. After crying my heart out, I sat dazed in my room, staring into space. I'm such a fool, I murmured, and large tears began to spill again. My gaze fell on a painting I had made as a child and had gifted to my grandfather. He had framed it and kept it hanging lovingly. Rising unsteadily, I picked up the painting. Grandpa. As I continued, my emotions swelled, and I started to cry. I recalled the notes my grandfather and I used to exchange on the back of that painting, like a family journal. Knowing that I was to inherit the house, he probably figured. I found this note. I'm glad I noticed, I said, shuddering at the thought that I might have left it unnoticed. I reached for a sheet of notepaper that had fallen from the back of the frame, with the note addressed to me. The date on the letter was just before my grandfather passed. I knew you'd definitely notice this letter. Right now, you're probably wondering why I distributed my estate in such a manner. I read aloud. Cash to you, a sister, and an old house and land for you. It may seem like I favored Susan, but that's not the case, the letter revealed, finally answering the question that had been bothering me. Despite any claims of favoritism, I wanted to leave most of my estate to you, bouqueted for me till the end. I finally understood what had been bothering me, and I continued to read the letter. But Susan would not be satisfied with a regular division. This child, even as her grandfather, I must admit, she's terribly greedy. Exactly, Grandpa? I whispered in agreement, though he couldn't hear me. She even took my boyfriend from me. That's what I want to tell him in my heart. That's why I arranged it this way, I read. While Susan may appear to have received the better deal at first glance, she won't pay attention to your share. According to Grandfather's letter, the value of this land in our area is continuously increasing due to ongoing urban development. As of the time I'm writing this, it's not worth Susan's $20 million yet, but the value of this land will surely increase in the future. As I read this far, my eyes widened in surprise. You can live here if you're attached to it, or you can sell it when its value rises enough to make a good profit. All I want is for you to be happy, Grandfather's letter had said. When I finished conveying the content of the letter, Susan clicked her tongue and said, Hag. I lived in that house for a while, but when my marriage was settled, I decided to sell the house. Just like Grandfather's letter said, the land value had risen enough. Anyway, I'm never lending you money, Susan declared. But as if she had a good idea, she added, right. If you want, I can give Brian back to you. So help your sister. It's a good deal, right? At this moment, something inside me snapped. Enough was enough. You've been taken care of by my grandpa, and yet you haven't shown a hint of gratitude. I despise you for that, and you're not my sister anymore. Besides, I'm already married. I don't need Brian, and I don't even want to see his face. Stay out of my life for good. I said what I needed to say and hung up. I quickly set up call blocking, and my cat on my lap was cowering on the bed. I quickly picked up my cat and said, I'm sorry. After that, it seems Susan contacted Brian, and they both stormed into our old house. Did they try to return Brian to me? There's a respectable end there now, but they must have misunderstood something and were shouting that they were my relatives. Even though I just sold the land and had nothing to do with it, it's simple for those two. I sold the land, and an inn was built equals I must be the owner of the inn. Of course, the staff reported to the police. The two of them were arrested because they had destroyed several items in the inn. Furthermore, it was discovered that they had been committing marriage fraud for money in the past. It seems they'll be sent to prison together. I was also questioned by the police, but I was able to prove that I had no involvement. Quickly, as we were estranged, I was released. As my husband, who came to pick me up, and I were walking through the station, we heard screaming and turned our gaze. There were Susan and Brian, who looked completely different. Fortunately, they didn't notice us. Both of them had messy hair, worn-out clothes, and looked nothing like the two people I remember. Especially Susan, who never skipped her makeup and fashion, looked even more different. They were probably being moved to a different location. As I watched the two of them, filled with a sense of melancholy, my husband and I locked eyes. I grabbed the hand he extended, and we left the police station. Are you okay? My husband, always concerned, looked at me with gentle eyes. I'm okay. I have you and this little one. I touched my fairly noticeable belly and smiled back. In my belly, a new member of our family is growing. Money is important, but there's something even more valuable. That's what I want to teach our child, with my husband by my side. After the somber funeral for my father, a prominent shareholder, my brother-in-law caught us off guard by raising the delicate topic of inheritance. The focus shifted to stocks and a substantial $5 million bequest, confidently asserting that my wife, the eldest daughter, and my sister was set to inherit this windfall. The revelation initially filled her with joy at the prospect of a significant inheritance. However, their excitement was short-lived when the family lawyer delivered the disheartening news that my brother-in-law had no legitimate claim to the inheritance. I, Greg Johnson, a 42-year-old office worker, reflected on my father's vibrant life. Despite his age of 78, he remained full of vitality, actively engaged in his work. My older sister, a perpetual source of trouble, led a carefree life, causing continuous worry for our parents. In her middle age, she introduced Aaron Corner, a man she intended to marry. Despite his youth and handsomeness, I couldn't warm up to him due to his demeanor. My sister demanded that our father finance her wedding, swiftly depleting the funds and unapologetically seeking more. A year after her marriage, tragedy struck. Our father collapsed while playing golf and passed away a few days later. Overwhelmed by grief, I found myself struggling with the funeral preparations, with no assistance from my sister. After the funeral, a lawyer visited our home to discuss the inheritance outlined in my father's will. While my mother and I were already aware of its contents, my sister and brother-in-law were oblivious until then. They shockingly claimed that the stocks and the $5 million inheritance should go to my wife. Stunned and speechless, my mother and I were taken aback. The lawyer corrected them, revealing that my brother-in-law had no right to inherit. Surprised and disappointed, my sister and her husband expressed disbelief and shock. The lawyer dropped another bombshell. My sister and I did not share the same father. This revelation left my sister furious, demanding an explanation from our mother, who wore an indescribable expression. The long-held family secret had finally come to light, leaving my sister shaken and seeking answers. "I'm sorry," our mother managed to say amidst the shaking emotions. "You are the child of my previous husband. Since childhood, my sister had teased me, claiming that Dad loved her more. Now faced with the truth, she seemed unable to accept it. However, she quickly shifted her stance, suggesting that if she was adopted, she would still have inheritance rights. Aaron chimed in, agreeing with her, yet our mother firmly denied any adoption, causing disbelief. "I'm the eldest daughter, and even Dad said so," my sister angrily declared, glaring at me in response. I felt my anger intensifying as I countered my sister's insatiable desire for more, despite the considerable amount of money our dad had already given her. My brother-in-law chimed in, supporting her claim and stating that it's natural to spend money on one's daughter. However, the lawyer intervened, drawing attention to the questionable spending, including debt repayment, and suggested reviewing the will. My sister panicked, claiming ignorance about any will. It turned out that our father had wanted to discuss and decide the contents with the family, but she had skipped it for frivolous reasons. When the lawyer proposed reviewing the will, my sister and her husband reluctantly agreed. The will clearly stated the transfer of property to my mother and me, explaining why my sister was not adopted. Her mistreatment of me and reckless spending had disappointed our father, realizing she had no right to the inheritance. My sister was visibly shocked, and her brother-in-law, who had initially supported her, suddenly changed his tune, accusing her of lying and abruptly leaving the room. In her anger, my sister blamed our mother for not asking to have her adopted, claiming it was unfair that only Mom received the inheritance. Frustrated, she cried and screamed, expressing her disappointment. Despite my sister's outrageous behavior, the lawyer remained calm, explaining that as the biological son, I had the right to receive it all. Before things escalated further, he warned that the police might need to be involved if the situation continued. My sister appeared startled by the mention of the police, given her history of repeated theft. As my mother spoke tearfully to her, she clicked her tongue and left the room. Half a year passed, and the inheritance proceedings were completed without issue. Despite some grumbling from my sister and brother-in-law, they couldn't stand against the lawyer's efficiency. My mother gave my sister a small amount of money, but I had no intention of interfering. The frustrating part for our family was that the two had disappeared. Their blatant greed was so evident that even our relatives were lost for words. One day, my wife suggested that my mother, daughter, and I go out to eat. Since my father's passing, our mother had been down, but she showed smiles when with her granddaughter. I suggested to my mother, "Why don't you live with us?" But Rook still comes home occasionally. Sis only comes around to beg for money, doesn't she? How long does she plan to keep this up? The reason my mom defends my sister is that she is her blood-related child, and there might be concern that if we visit our family home, my sister might cause trouble again. Understanding that, I told her to take her time thinking about it and then drove my mom to our family home. Upon arrival, we encountered something unexpected. The lights were on in our supposedly empty home. It wasn't the time for the helper to come, so we were puzzled. I parked the car, suggesting, "Let's go up and have some coffee with Mother." We got out of the car and headed to the entrance, but the moment we approached the door, a car came rushing in. "Mom, watch out." Hearing my daughter ahead of me, I shielded my wife with my body. The car just grazed me, and I managed to dodge it, but I collided with a nearby flower bed, injuring myself badly. The car stopped after hitting the garage door. "Are you okay, Dad?" My wife and daughter rushed over, supporting me. Mother was trembling in shock at the sudden event. Understandably, from that moment on, a day of turmoil began. I was taken to the hospital by ambulance and had to be hospitalized briefly. Later, I heard that Aaron Warner, my brother-in-law, was driving the car. According to the police, he explained that he mistook the accelerator for the brake. However, I had my doubts about that story. Amidst all of this, my sister and mother visited me in the hospital. Mother left briefly to arrange flowers, and during that time, my sister coldly looked at me and said, "You're only tough and bodied, huh?" With a slightly disappointed tone, I couldn't help but give her a smile. "If I had died in the accident, Mom would inherit everything, right? Messed up your plan," I said a bit sarcastically, and my sister looked uneasy. "You planned this, didn't you?" When I asked, my sister looked away, and I added, "But I won't be accepting Mom's share, so it won't work out for you." My sister looked surprised at this. She probably thought I would naturally accept it. I have a wife and kids, so I passed the inheritance to them. It's not strange for the head of the family to think that way. Even so, I've made a will early, like Dad did. My sister was taken aback at this. "What? So that means—" "Yeah, unfortunately, my share of the inheritance won't go to Mom." My sister stared at me, then began to shake with anger. "There's $5 million, right? You could at least share a bit." When I immediately refused, my sister furiously grabbed my collar. "I'm your sister. We should split it." Whether it was the amount of the inheritance that drove her mad, she continued to scream in a very aggressive voice. I felt pity for my sister. It's that greedy attitude that disappointed Dad. Don't you get it? My sister's face turned even redder, and she grabbed my neck. "Bro, stop it." Mother, who had just returned, scolded her loudly. Then the nurses, called by the nurses' call button, arrived and escorted my sister out of the room. Mother seemed to want to protect my sister, but my sister had lashed out at her too. As she left, she asked, "Why did she turn out like this?" Hearing Mother say this sadly, I felt the pain in my heart. Later, Mother's health deteriorated, and she fell off, gradually weakening. My wife and I started visiting the family home more frequently to support her, but this seemed to upset my sister. Probably she encountered my wife when coming to ask for money or heard about it from Mother. One day, my sister called my cell phone. "From now on, we will take care of Mom. You guys don't need to come. Watch this." All of a sudden, however, My sister wasn't listening and said, "We've already decided," before hanging up. My wife told me she had been turned away by my sister. Too concerned about how my sister, who had no experience in household chores or living, would manage, I quickly contacted Mother. To my surprise, I found out that my brother-in-law had experience in caregiving. Mother was still independent, not yet in a worrying state. This reassured me. However, within just a month, Mother was rushed to the hospital in an ambulance. It was said to be due to a medication dosage error. When we rushed to the hospital, Mother was shockingly weak. The doctors also seemed puzzled by her condition. I couldn't recall such a mistake ever happening before. Leaving my wife to care for Mother, I went to our family home, which was in a terrible state. Despite my mother's love for cooking, the usually well-stocked fridge was shockingly empty. Even the helper had been swiftly dismissed. Feeling ashamed of trusting my sister even a little, anger surged within me. Checking the safe where valuables were kept, I discovered a large amount of money missing from Mother's passbook. The passbook with the inheritance was secure in a bank locker, but there was hardly any money left for living expenses. Returning to my mother, I explained the situation and revealed my sister's betrayal. Brooke did such a thing. Mother seemed unaware of the passbook issue and showed a shocked expression. When asked about the medication error, she explained that my brother-in-law had prepared it and looked troubled. "Mom, I don't think you should let them into that house. They claimed they would take care of you, but the state of that house was the worst. And you've gotten so frail. Haven't they been feeding you properly?" Speaking with concern, I hung her head. "Mom, let's live together. I'll build a new house, and we can live there together." Moved by my suggestion, Mother shed tears. However, her condition continued to worsen. Despite the doctor's best efforts, they, along with my sister, seemed to weigh heavily on her. Ultimately, Mother passed away without recovering. When I went to the family home for the funeral, all the valuable items had disappeared. It seemed that my sister and brother-in-law, in need of money, had taken them. Standing in the desolate place, I was overcome with anger. I had to find a way to make my sister take responsibility for Mother's sake and as atonement for what she had done. I resolved to do something. The day after Mother's funeral, my sister and I met at the lawyer's office to discuss the inheritance. "Condolences, but as her daughter, I'm entitled to Mother's inheritance," my sister said with a sense of superiority that made me laugh involuntarily. She seemed to be under some misconception. "Let's open the will then." As the lawyer revealed the contents of the will, my sister turned pale. "You're joking. Why, bro? You are not entitled to any of the inheritance. This is in accordance with Dad's wishes." My brother-in-law started to get angry, but the lawyer had nothing else to say except repeat the same thing. "This must be a mistake. Bro is her child, isn't she?" My brother-in-law suddenly became furious, throwing things off the table. "Are you trying to trick us? We won't let you get away with this. Give us the inheritance now." "Aaron, you planned to kill Mother, didn't you?" When I asked, my brother-in-law glared at me unpleasantly. "Oh, I wouldn't do such a thing." "Then why did the medication error occur?" My brother-in-law appeared annoyed. "I don't know anything about that. It's impossible that I can't inherit. You must have done something." My sister was getting more agitated. "Now I'm even behind on my condo payments." I was shocked. She hadn't rushed to Mother's side after hearing of her death because she was busy with such matters, hoping for the inheritance. "Really, there's nothing left." My sister pressed the lawyer. "That seems to be the case. Let me explain in detail." The lawyer explained the details of the inheritance. Ultimately, after deducting what my sister had withdrawn and sold, there was hardly anything left for her to inherit. My sister held her head in dismay. I had discussed this in advance with the lawyer. I found satisfaction with the outcome. "Stop joking. There can't be so little." My mother and I hadn't told my sister, but most of Mother's property had already been distributed to my children, her grandchildren. Therefore, there was already little left to inherit. However, my sister kept murmuring her dissatisfaction. I felt nothing but resentment towards my sister, who had lived off the money given by Father and now Mother. thinking she could rest easy knowing I would take care of her. But you just took her money. You are a true disgrace to our parents. I raised my voice in frustration. Caring for someone costs money, you know. Don't you understand? Then show me the receipts for what you spent on mom's care. I'll cover any necessary expenses. As I extended my hand, my sister turned pale and was at a loss for words. I threw those away. That's not good. Without receipts, it can't be proven as evidence. Hearing the lawyer's words, my sister struggled to find a response. During this, my brother-in-law tried to calm me down. Greg, your sister is in a tough spot. Maybe you could help her out a bit as family. I cannot. My immediate response left my brother-in-law speechless. I've been hurt by my sister for a long time. Frankly, I feel like it's karma, but you're the only siblings, maybe just a little. He tried to say more, but I refused. I was filled with anger, and so was my brother-in-law, apparently. Dan, if that accident had worked out, Rook would have had the entire inheritance. What accident? Before I could ask, my brother-in-law started talking on his own. Because of this brother, things didn't go as planned. I was supposed to get a new car, but now there's barely enough money left even for repairs. My sister tried to stop him, but it was too late. That's a pretty serious statement. You could be accused of fraud. The lawyer held a recorder, smirking at my sister and brother-in-law. What the heck? Isn't that against the rules to do that? You agreed to our conversation being recorded at the beginning, didn't you? Called out by his own words, my brother-in-law's face turned pale. To him, I had one thing to say. Aaron, I will be pressing charges about that accident. Don't joke. Where's the evidence? The evidence has just been provided by you. My sister, crying, began to hit my brother-in-law. You idiot! It's all your fault. Why did you say that? Later, my brother-in-law faced legal consequences for his actions. Additionally, unresolved suspicions about his past emerged, requiring police involvement. For some time, my sister, as an accomplice, was said to face lesser charges. However, struggling with her condo payments, she was turned away by relatives when she asked for money. In contrast, I chose to work earnestly and not rely on inheritance. Now, receiving stock dividends has become a small pleasure in my life. In the aftermath of the legal proceedings, the rift between my sister and me widened. The family bonds that were already strained became nearly non-existent. Despite her attempts to seek support from relatives, my sister faced a cold shoulder and her financial struggles continued. Meanwhile, I focused on building a stable and fulfilling life for my own family, working diligently. I found solace in providing for my wife and children without relying on the tumultuous inheritance battles that had plagued us. The stock dividends became not just a financial benefit, but a symbol of my commitment to a more secure and principled life. Over time, my sister's situation didn't improve. The consequences of her actions weighed heavily on her, both financially and emotionally. It became a stark reminder of the importance of responsible choices and the lasting impact they can have on one's life. As the years passed, I held no ill will towards my sister, recognizing that everyone faces their own battles and makes their own choices. Still, the events that unfolded served as a powerful lesson about the significance of integrity, responsibility, and the enduring consequences of one's actions. In the midst of the turmoil, I found strength in forging ahead with resilience, determined to create a future that wasn't tainted by past misfortunes. The dividends, once a mere financial gain, evolved into a testament to the enduring power of personal growth and the ability to rise above adversity. Life moved forward, and I embraced the opportunities to thrive, leaving behind the shadows of familial discord. The lessons learned from this chapter of my life became an integral part of shaping my values and decisions, ensuring a legacy built on principles rather than the pursuit of material gain. In the end, it was not the inheritance that defined my journey, but the choices made along the way. Choices that led to a life grounded in authenticity, resilience, and a commitment to building a better future for those I cared about the most.